because we had discovered early on that Mike was a really good driver when he drank beer, and so we made Mike drive. And I was going to repeat what Tim said, that John was the whitest person that I ever met. And I don't mean that in any kind of a cultural reference, but despite all that, he would dutifully go with us to the beach, and he would try to get a tan, and he would turn pink or he would turn red. And I remember so distinctly, one Monday he came to school, and he was this really wonderful shade of orange, because he had decided to spray himself with some sort of spray on tan, and for months after, he was Orange Boy. After Notre Dame, it was UCLA. Jay was a roommate of mine my last year in college. And that year we convinced ourselves that we should go to law school. I don't think we ever really developed the plan more than that. I went to UCLA and he went east to Missouri. I don't think I ever really truly forgave him for that. And I'm sure I was the worse for the wisdom that I didn't get from John during those years. I had some notion that it was going to be access to the film business, and fortunately John had a little wiser plan in mind for himself, which turned out to be Cindy and a career here in St. Louis and the Lee Lane, and none of that surprised me at all, nor did the fact that the good people of St. Louis decided to make him a judge. Because when you think about it, John was essentially formed at 15 and was the same person at 55 that he was at 15. Stubborn, yes. Opinionated when asked. Incredibly kind. I don't think I ever heard him say a mean word to anybody. An incredible work ethic. And just a real respect for the truth, you know. And all I can really say is just from start to finish, excellent behavior. Thank you.
Well, I have to say that time causes a lot of those memories of the things they did that would have caused John not to become a judge have been forgotten, obviously. But I suspect that, you know, our children don't have the same luxury because they've all put it on YouTube and Instagram, and we were fortunate we didn't have phones and pictures, or there'd be trouble. But what I'd like to do is next ask Lee Lawless to come up. Lee was also in law school with us, and Lee followed in a much similar path to John in trying to help people in need in the St. Louis community through their services in legal aid for John, and at the U.S. Public Defender Office for Lee. And they both have served our community and delivered so much value that I'd love to have Lee come and tell us about his relationship to John.
Thank you, and thank you to Cindy, Lisa, and Will for asking me to represent some of his friends here today. I met John 46 years ago at a St. Louis Hughes Student Bar Association function. Yes, it was on a Friday, and yes, it was a happy hour. But that was the first time we had talked, and here we are, all these years later, about half a block away from Llewellyn's, which used to be one of the places that he would frequent when he lived just down the block at Taylor and McPherson. He was a year ahead of me in school, but he was hard to miss with his Hawaiian shirts, which I guess he picked up on in California. His kind of laid-back California attitude, which I guess he traded in for that Chaffee twang. But he was on the Law Journal, and he had graduated with honors. And he had seen John Wooden's Billikens play at Pauley Pavilion, which put him at the top of my rankings as far as what a college basketball pleasure could be. We worked together and got to know each other after he graduated when he was a law clerk for the distinguished jurist Theodore McMillian on the Missouri Court of Appeals, and I was working as a student intern there for the year. So John was kind of my supervisor and helped me out, and I developed an appreciation for his lightning quick wit. And you'd have a conversation with John, and man, his responses were back so fast and so funny. It was just unbelievable. His hard work and his willingness to relax with friends when the work was done. Play hard, work hard. We were gym rats together at the old downtown YMCA. He played a lot of racquetball. I ran there. We played softball together for 25 years on men's and co-ed teams. One of the co-ed teams was kind of partially named in his honor and partially for the Grateful Dead, the Uncle John's Band. We were dedicated Cardinals and Billikens fans, so dedicated that we went to Kansas City and got to enjoy games 6 and 7 of the losses to the Royals in '85. And we followed the Billikens to a postseason tournament in Indianapolis where their play-in game was at 8 in the morning, which they lost. And we were then in Indianapolis with 2 days on our hands and not a real full schedule. It gave us an opportunity to drive around the Oval at Indianapolis. I'd never been to that place. I was one of the many people who had the pleasure of attending John's swearing in. That move from being a legal aid attorney to the bench is not all that common. Usually it's a prosecutor, someone that's outspoken, someone, John got there strictly on the merit of his practice of law. He promised to be and was an extremely hardworking judge. I was looking over my notes from the quick little talk I gave then, and I referenced in it the letter that he had written with his application, pointing out the importance of that state court in the way that people perceive justice. I mean, Supreme Court's nice, federal courts are nice, but day to day where the rubber meets the road is in the state courts. And all of those people that come in front of them, all the people that are seeking protective writs, all that type of stuff, the way they're treated is what their opinion of legal system is going to be. And I would stop by his courtroom when I was out in St. Louis County to visit with my clients at the jail, I guess respectfully known as the St. Louis County Justice Center. To watch and admire him at work. Sometimes if I got there early, I would go into chambers, but sometimes just sit in the back row and watch things going on. I knew where to call him on Sunday because he was always going to be in his chambers. When we had time to talk, most of our discussions were about integrity, his concern about some of the abuses by lawyers, of trying to run up bills on clients who really couldn't afford it by protracted litigation, and his concern about what that was going to take away from the children involved in the dissolution. Our wives, Cindy and my wife Mary Louise, had worked together as young registered nurses before John and I were part of their equation at all. And for the past 10 years, we had the privilege of planning trips and traveling to mid-Europe, Scotland, the Dominican Republic, and most recently to Greece. John told me about his illness being terminal, matter-of-factly, when we were driving to a basketball game. But the four of us were able to meet for a couple of front porch COVID cocktail hours, even planning for a future trip at that point. As we've begun to open back up socially, I realize more and more what a hole his passing has left in my life. In talking with Mary Louise, about how she would sum up John. She said he was a good, steady, and loyal friend. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask Dan Glazer come up. Dan is the executive director of the St. Louis Legal Aid Society and was both a mentor, a boss, and a friend, as well as the next door neighbor of John and Cindy and their children for many years. I will say it because Dan's too polite to say it, but if you would like to leave something behind in memory of John, his heart was always with legal aid. Dan?
Thank you, Mike. So I am so honored to be with you all to talk about my friend, my work colleague, and my neighbor, John. Cindy, Will, and Lisa, thank you so much for bringing us all together. That means so much to us, so we can reflect our fond memories of this unique, wonderful guy. So my introduction to John was actually as a fellow staffer at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, where we worked together for almost 20 years. I was primarily a housing attorney during that time, and John was the director of the volunteer lawyer program at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. So to help you understand the significance of that position that John held, I want to share a little bit of history. So sit back, this will be a 20-minute history lesson. Anyway, all right, sorry. So in 1981, the National Legal Services Corporation initiated volunteer lawyer programs within legal aid agencies across the entire country. The idea that this was going to be, got it. Sorry.
You need it? Okay. No, we're fine.
This was another tool. This was another tool, volunteer lawyer program. Sorry, I better move away. Okay. All right. By the way, I would probably be the person most likely to have done that. And my wife is right there, and she will amen that. Anyway, the idea of the volunteer lawyer program was that it was another tool to help legal aid staff attorneys deliver vital legal representation to those in need. And interestingly, the idea for a nationwide volunteer lawyer program, or VLP as it is called, within legal aids actually partially began in St. Louis as the brainchild of St. Louis attorney Bill McAlpin. Some of you here certainly remember Bill. He was a member of the ABA, and he pioneered the creation of this. And Bill was a close friend and colleague of someone who I know even more of you remember, LSCM Legal Services of Eastern Missouri Executive Director at the time, Richard B. Title. Rick. So given all that background, Rick was very invested in creating a VLP program that would be a national model for how such programs should be run. Think about that. For that critical task, he turned to John. John had been a consumer lawyer at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri before that. But he turned to John, and he made him the very first volunteer lawyer program director of a program that really went nationwide. And as he often did, Rick got that decision absolutely right. John was a natural for that job. His vast contacts with the legal community, his penchant for working extremely hard, his keen knowledge of the law, and his deep commitment to the low-income clients we served all contributed to John launching, building, and sustaining a very successful volunteer lawyer program at Legal Services, which indeed served and I hope still serves as a national model. But it turned out, though, that John's greatest gift in this position was as a skilled, caring mentor to the many law students and young lawyers who worked in the volunteer lawyer program. Marie Kenyon, I'm not sure if Marie's here, but there she is. Yes, thank you. There's Marie, who is indeed here, remembers fondly the importance of John's tutelage when, as a brand new attorney in the Catholic Legal Assistance Ministry Program, part of VLP, housed at Legal Service, I know that's confusing, but it worked, she benefited from John's mentorship. As Marie told me when we talked, he taught me how to be an attorney. He took me under his wing and gave me the confidence that I could be a good lawyer and make a difference in our clients' lives. Jim Guest, who is our current volunteer lawyer program director at Legal Services, actually interned with John as a SLU law student in our VLP program under John's supervision. So he remembers John sharing with him and his fellow interns the absolute importance of understanding the need of our clients and how strong pro bono legal response needed to be for our clients to succeed and meet their needs. As Jim remembers, he had a really friendly, supportive approach with us, but he was insistent that we find and help and get help for as many clients as possible. As Jim said, his passion truly inspired me as a law student and later as a lawyer to want to help. And how about this? Jim became, ultimately, as I said, our volunteer lawyer director. And what he remembers fondly is that almost immediately after getting that job, John reached out to him. Now, he was an associate circuit court judge then. He reached out to him, said, let's go to lunch. And he wanted to offer more support and remind Jim of the importance of pro bono VLP for the effective delivery of legal services. In recognition of John's incredible contributions to the growth and development of young lawyers through his role as a VLP director, in 2008, we at Legal Services created the John R. Essner Young Lawyer of the Year Award, named for John in 2008, which is given every year at our annual awards luncheon. And it's given to a young volunteer attorney who engages in outstanding pro bono legal work. So John had made many other valuable contributions to our work and the mission of Legal Services, including he created a project to mobilize law students and volunteer attorneys to help navigate FEMA and Small Business Administration federal flood relief services in the wake of the catastrophic flooding in 1993. Some of you have been around for a while. All of us, many of us remember that. He mobilized students and volunteer lawyers to help people at their time of great need. He also led the effort, and maybe many of you don't know this, to find Legal Services of Eastern Missouri's very first building to own as our main headquarters. Rick turned to him and said, you lead this. And he did. And he found a place. And guess what? It's a building we still work and own to this day. So in fact, for me, speaking on a personal note for a second, it turns out John was directly responsible for both the building I currently work in and the house I live in. What are the chances of that, huh? Yes, it's true. So in 1993, we're going back, but I was at the Jackson Park Elementary School playground, which is right up the street from where the Essners lived, and I was with my two kids at the time. No, they're still my kids. Still my kids. 5-year-old Ethan and 2-year-old Rihanna. When I remembered, John lived right down the street from the playground. So after playground time was over, the kids and I showed up unannounced at John's house on Tulane in U City. He was extremely welcoming to us intruders. He showed us around. He told me that the house next door, which had the same floor plan as the Essner house, Cindy and John's house, was for sale. Nancy and I loved the house, loved the neighborhood, and we bought it and lived next door to Cindy, John, Elisa, and Will until they moved. You moved. Yeah. We shared a lot as neighbors, including unabashed animal lover Cindy talking us into, she's trying to remember this, talking us into taking a rescue cat she found, maybe Lyndall found, I don't know, but this cat, right? And we took that cat in as a pet. We called her Maxie. And then they returned the favor because they got us to accept a guinea pig that they took care of. I'm wrapping up. John was very generous in inviting me on a number of occasions to Cardinal baseball and Billiken basketball games with his vast community of loyal friends, of course, many of whom are here today. So as I wrap up and reflecting on John in preparation for speaking today, I am struck by how adept he was at creating community in friendships, in family, in the cadre of law students and young lawyers he mentored, in the network of lawyers who made up his volunteer lawyer panels, and of those of us who worked and admired him. I consider myself very fortunate to have been part of John's multi-layered community. And I know I join with so many of you and so many others in John's community when I say, I miss you, John, and I'll never forget you. Thank you.
I'll say it again, that as a young lawyer, I did do volunteer legal services for legal aid. And it's something that we don't honor enough. What he did to make that come alive. And that so many people have been helped because of John. And directly, and afterwards as a judge, he not only went to the office all the time, spent all that time there, but he cared about the people who were in front of him and pondered long, hard hours about how to do the right thing. And so all of us who are lawyers looked up to John, respected him, loved his sage advice, but more importantly, he instilled the same thing in his son, Will. And I'm going to ask Will to come up and talk on behalf of he and Elisa. Lisa, like me, I told Elisa that I understand why you don't want to get up here and speak, because I couldn't even get up and speak for my own father's funeral, and I know how hard it is. So I asked Will on behalf of both of them to come up and talk, both as a son and a lawyer who's adopted all his dad's values.
So my dad meant the world to me and Elisa, and as we've grown older and hopefully a little bit wiser, we've come to realize just how fortunate we were to grow up with such loving, dedicated, incredible parents. So first, to my amazing mom, whose strength and steadfast love is an inspiration to us each and every day. Let me just say thank you, and I love you so much, more than I could ever express. So I love you, Mom. So as we can see from the variety of speakers we've heard from today, my dad was a man who wore many different hats. To some of you, he's Jay from California, Mr. Speak Softly, but wear a loud shirt with the white, rocking the white boy afro. He was a beloved brother and a childhood friend to many of you here with us today, both in person and virtually. So to others, he's Judge Essner, that stalwart of Division 37 for so many years. White boy afro by this time replaced by his trademark mustache that was as much of a constant in my life as anything else. And of course, to many of you, he's a lifelong pink flamingo and a dear, dear friend. But to Elisa and I, he's just dad, a role that one might assume he was born to play. Well, not exactly. Not too many years ago, I had a conversation with my dad in which he told me that before meeting my mom, he wasn't sure he wanted to have kids. This came as somewhat of a shock to me, not only because he ended up being such a great dad, but because Dad was such a dad. Corny jokes, high white gym socks, he had it all. But beyond that, he was just so well suited for the role as a man. He was naturally selfless, kind and gentle, hardworking and honest. So with all of that, you can imagine my surprise to hear of his initial hesitation. But at the same time, what he told me wasn't fully unbelievable. Still waters run deep, they say, and there was always more to my dad's thought process than the surface revealed. So I just chalked it up to another mystery of Dad and moved on. But in any event, as I stand before you today as evidence, my dad did clearly come around to the idea of fatherhood. And as my mom's explained to me, once that was the plan, it was as if it had been his idea all along. But that was just the man he was. So having now taken to the role of father, my dad always found a way to be involved in me and Elisa's lives. Despite increasing roles and responsibilities with legal services, he coached my youth t-ball and basketball teams. He was the den leader for my Cub Scout troop. Now, we all know my dad wasn't the world's greatest athlete, and certainly wasn't the world's greatest outdoorsman, as many of our harrowing float trips down the Merrimack River would demonstrate. But we all survived, just a few scars, nothing worse. But Dad just loved spending time with his kids, and he always found a way to show up and do his best in whatever it was, and that's all we could ever ask for. Elisa and I loved spending time with Dad too, in whatever way. Sunday mornings in the 90s were spent riding through town in his faded blue Camry, checking items off the to-do list he'd have written that morning in his indecipherable handwriting that you just had to assume he knew what it said, and I think most of the time he did. So we'd go from the cleaners to the recycling plant to the Target on Brentwood, which when it opened we would visit multiple times a week for some random reason. You never know. But Elisa and I were always content to just be with Dad for the journey, regardless of the destination. And as we grew older, that didn't change. All of our lives got busier, but Dad still always found a way to be involved. He was our go-to mentor. He was our career counselor. He was the first we'd celebrate victories with and the first to pick us up after the defeats. And most importantly of all, as Elisa and I became adults, Dad became a true friend. Always eager and enthusiastic to catch up over the phone, root on the Billikens, or grab a burger and a beer over a cards game at O'Connell's. Elisa and I have so many cherished memories of those simple moments, enough to last a lifetime, but never enough. But how lucky we are to have those recollections of overwhelming love and happiness to look back on and hold in our hearts. So with this lifetime of memories with the man and the relationship we had with him taking on so many different roles over the years, Elisa and I could fill a book with the lessons he taught us. Lessons for living a life like his, which is full to the brim with family, friends, a career that he loved and which made the world around him a little bit better and a little bit kinder. Lessons for living simply and not through some Spartan denial of the world around it, but by paring down the things that didn't matter and focusing on the things that do. Little things, heaping bowl of Wheaties and Fiber One and a steaming cup of black coffee next to the Post-Dispatch. A pair of warm socks unwrapped next to his family on Christmas morning. And of course, a Target run any day of the week. So all of these things brought my dad a little bit closer to his family, his home, and the things that he loved. They allowed him to find peace and his own kind of quiet and content joy, a selfless and hopeful and relentless and beautiful joy, which I'll always remember. I'll always remember that joy. As the singer John Prine said, "I remember everything, and I promise I will, Dad." In that same song, John Prine says, "How I miss you in the morning light, like the roses miss the dew." And I couldn't put it any better myself. I love you, I miss you, and I carry you in my heart every day, Dad.
As I mentioned, John and I were not very handy. Fortunately, John had a brother-in-law who was, and I'll invite Kurt up here to talk about his knowledge of John.
Hello, everybody. This is not easy. Several months ago, Cindy called me, said she felt it was time for us to have a service for John. She asked if I wanted to speak. and I immediately accepted, although I had no idea what I was going to say. But I knew I wanted to be a part of the service and sharing the celebration of John's life. There are so many memories we have of John, but one stood out that I've never been able to forget, and it explained to me who John was, and it was when he was with Legal Aid. So several years ago, when John was working for Legal Aid, he called me and said that Ike had invited us to come out to play golf at the country club. And I quickly accepted, but John was also quick to follow up that there was a stop we had to make somewhere near Sullivan, Missouri. He said he had a client he had to visit with, and it would work out well going to see the client versus the client coming into St. Louis. But he assured me it wouldn't take long and we'd have plenty of time to tear up Ike's golf course. I picked him up and we set out on the road, taking 44 West. As we passed Union, I asked John exactly where we needed to go. And he gave me some directions, says, we're gonna get off at this exit, we're gonna take a left, and we're gonna go a mile this way and a right that way, and we'll come up to a stop sign and this person should be waiting for us. And sure enough, there she was waiting for us. Her car looked barely drivable. She was a young mother, had 2 young kids with her, and she looked like she had her hands full with them. John got out and had a brief conversation with her, and the plan was to follow her to her home. We drove a few miles and ended up, it was a dirt road and led to an old rickety, rusting trailer. John got out with his briefcase and said he needed about a half hour or so, and the kids stayed outside playing on a rusted, unstable swing set. I sat in the car just absorbing the moment that John put me in. It was obvious that this person had very little means, and I could not begin to fathom how she was able to get by. Where I was parked, I could see through the trailer window, and I could see John sitting and the young lady sitting there talking. And for the most part, I could see the mom was doing most of the talking, and John sat there listening. And this was something that I've heard from so many people, that John listened. Every now and then during the conversation, I could see John do something that I witnessed a lot over the years. He would raise his hand, but never in a rude or dismissive way, but in a way that brought calm to the moment. About a half hour passed, John came out of the trailer. He got back in the car and headed down the road. And I asked him what her situation was, and she was just trying to make a better life for herself, along with her kids, and needed some help navigating through the legal part of making that happen. It didn't look like the father or the husband or the family was going to be much in the picture to help. We all know John had left a large firm, paying a well-paying job, and he went off to join Legal Aid. He felt he wasn't able to help people the way he wanted to by working for a large firm. Last year, just after John passed away, several of us gathered in Forest Park, and Ted McDonald spoke. And part of what he said was, there's a lot of us that talk the talk, but very few of us that walk the walk. And John walked the walk. This young mother had no idea who John was. She had no idea that he really did care about her well-being, and that he wasn't just there as an attorney collecting a paycheck. That moment was a snapshot of who John was, and it has stayed with me ever since. Since he passed away, I've had a number of people and customers at the restaurant that worked for John or knew John and had no idea I was his brother-in-law. But somehow or another, we discovered our connection, and everybody, and I mean everybody, shared their heartfelt condolences and expressed how much they enjoyed knowing him or being in his court. The morning John passed away, I was sitting at the bar at the restaurant, my phone rang. It was Ike. I knew this was going to be a hard phone call to take. When I finally answered, For several moments, all we could do was hold on the line, as we couldn't collect our emotions long enough to say anything. I always knew that John had some wonderful lifelong friendships, and it was going to be a hard, difficult day for a lot of people. I've always appreciated and admired those friendships that John had with all of you. So thank you so much for the love you've given Cindy, Lisa, and Will. Let us celebrate how fortunate we were to have John be a part of our lives. And as they say, let John's memory be a blessing to us all.
So before all of us cry, we'd like to take you back to a moment of happiness in their lives at their wedding song. And I'm going to ask Nancy and Mark to, Nancy to sing and Mark to accompany her and to take us back to the wedding of John and Cindy.
So I met John opening day 1979 of the Cardinals. I was at Park Place waiting for friends. He and Jack Sisk walked in. I was sitting at the bar, and the rest is history. Cindy, thank you so much for letting me, Mark, and me be a part of this very special day with so many friends who love him so much, and you all. There are places
save all of us a moment to enjoy, but also to collect ourselves. And at this point, I'd like to ask the Honorable Mike Burton, former Chief Judge or Presiding Judge. I apologize, I never went to court, I stayed away. But Mike, if you could come up and talk about John, I'd appreciate it.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the concept of Jay the orange marshmallow. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Cindy and Elisa and Will. Lee just said it right, that generally outspoken judges are the ones that make the bench. But in 1999, that really was the exception, because at that time, Judge Mary Pat Schrader, Judge Ellen Levy, myself, and John were all appointed to the bench. All wallflowers, very quiet folks. And actually, if you knew the other three, including myself, that would be clearly the case. We were very outspoken, and John was the clear exception. But we all got appointed at the same time. We got to know each other very well in a very quick way. And as would surprise you, John was clearly the most serious and the most quiet. We're fairly sure that during the times that we were together that John finally just gave up trying to get a word in edgewise with the rest of us. You know, there's no question that we look back at those times with a lot of fond memories. John, we've heard, I mean, everything that was said about John in the early years is just exactly the John that we knew when John took the bench. He was someone that was so committed to his job, just the way he was at Legal Services, just the way he was in high school. You know, I can think of, you know, so many times whenever I might be running late because of a trial, it was almost like a scene from a Humphrey Bogart movie. You'd come out to the garage and it'd be pitch black, and all of a sudden you'd see this, you know, cigarette light up. You know, and I almost felt like you'd drive up and you wanted to say, play it again, say it. And I saw John, and you know, John would just be out there, you know, after, you know, one of the most, you know, horrendous trials that was going on in the courthouse. John always, you know, had, you know, some of the worst trials that, you know, any of us would have. And he'd just be sitting there because it was just a day of emotion. And he'd just be sitting there pondering, thinking about, you know, the hell he just heard about, and thinking about, you know, the life of these kids that had to put up with just what he saw, a glimpse of. You know, for the entire 21 years that John was on the bench, he was in the family court domestic assignment. Hands down, not even a close call, the most difficult assignment. I don't know anybody that has been on the bench, with maybe one exception who's here today, hello Vicki, who has been in an assignment as long as John has, continuously, for 21 years. You know, it just speaks a ton about John, who never wanted to just take an assignment to, you know, do something to get away from that. He knew how important that assignment was, and he knew he was able to do a lot with that assignment. You know, lawyers and litigants, people would always just talk about, you know, when you get in front of John Essner, you got a fair shake. That man would give you as much time as you needed to get the case out and heard. And some of us less impatient judges, that would include myself, might not be as friendly and welcoming to the litigants when they're like, oh good, you've got a 17th witness. We're glad you're here. Come on in. You know, but anyone that walked out of Division 37 always knew they had their day in court. They had a fair shake. And we heard it, you know, it it just doesn't surprise me at all, but we've heard it a few times from folks this afternoon. John never complained, never. And he never said, there was never a time I can ever remember. And let me tell you, it's different with all the rest of us. When John would say anything negative about anyone, he just did the job, and did it well. And had spent all this time spending, day after day putting together, these incredible judgments that he'd craft, because he wanted to make sure that when people got those orders, they knew exactly why it was that the judge decided in the way that he did, and that it wasn't some fluke or some mistake or something that wasn't heard. They knew exactly why they got the justice that they received. We heard about John's biggest cheerleader in the legal field, Judge Rick Titleman. Those two probably at first blush you wouldn't say had a lot in common. Rick never met a stranger. I mean, there was, Rick would walk into a room and own it. Rick would be the kind of guy that knew everyone in the room. Rick would be the kind of guy that just knew everyone's name and just, was right in there. He was just full of life, and, he was just this powerhouse that, And John was just this guy that just didn't want any limelight, just was kind of like the guy that was just, I don't want to bring any attention to myself. I'm just going to do what needs to be done here. But as has been mentioned, what the two of them had in common was huge. They cared about the little guy in ways that I don't know too many people, in fact do. Huge hearts. And John in particular cared so much about victims of domestic violence and children that were in the horrible throes of these horrendous custody battles where you'd see people that would, hate each other so much that they would just throw their kids under the bus, and, it was nerve-wracking, but John had this incredible way of dealing with that. We heard about the John R. Essner Award, but, it was so fitting, but what, Dan didn't mention was, I don't know too many people that, get an award named after them while they're alive. I mean, and what an incredible tribute to John R. Essner. It just says a ton about the kind of person he was. And, he was absolutely a mentor. And a mentor that was not someone that would call up and say, I'm your mentor, here's what you need to do. A mentor that would just as Kurt mentioned, he'd walk the walk. He was the guy that would do exactly what we all want, people in the legal profession to do. Model incredible zealous advocacy, model incredible compassion. And that's what you had, in John Essner. And the thing about John is, with this award, that was named after him, he reminds me of those few people that just are ashamed, embarrassed to have any kind of accolade or praise thrown, their way, because that's just not what they're all about. John's death, I'm going to say Jay's death. I wish I knew that when he was around. It came so soon. And, it left such a void at the courthouse, a huge void. But we think about the incredible effect, the impact that he's had on thousands of people whose lives he touched, over his remarkable career. That soft-spoken guy had a very gentle but a very bold impact on this very fortunate community. Right before the last days of John's being at the courthouse, he and I had a long conversation. And, he knew he didn't have that much longer to live. And in typical John fashion, he didn't want to talk about, himself. But his big concern, and it's just the way John was he didn't want to be a burden on any of us. And here he is, with this incredible, illness that and he's worried about someone having to take some case that, he wasn't able to complete, and you try to tell him everything about please don't worry about that. And despite all of his incredible struggles, here's a guy that amazingly was able to, make sure that he had no pending cases under submission. That's a huge deal, in the family court. That's a feat for anybody, but it's a miracle given the circumstances that John was in. John's very private, as we know, and but what I did know and what I would hear in those, those times where we were able to have, in-depth conversations, was just how much he worshiped Cindy, how much he regularly bragged about Elisa and Will. And he just never forgot about the marginalized. He didn't talk about it much. And I just laugh when Kurt said, and I have it right here in, my last words, was that guy just walked the walk. And that says a lot about John Essner. I miss you, John.
Having spent many evenings with John when he was struggling, he would never, as Kurt probably would tell you and anyone else, he would never tell you what that client's problem was. I mean, John was the ultimate lawyer who would keep the confidences of his clients, of the people in his courtroom. And I would like to ask the the presiding judge, the Honorable Marriott, to come up and talk about John.
Cindy, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the enduring legacy that John left in the 21st Circuit. And in considering our friend John and that legacy, the very familiar words of the prophet Micah came to mind. And those are, what is required of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly through this world. And my goodness, didn't our friend John embody those words? Amen. He was a man of justice. He did justice, and not just in running his docket, but in interacting with everyone that came before him. He did justice for the great and the small. And I think that's one of the many reasons that so many attorneys and litigants were so pleased to have their case heard in front of John, because they knew that he did justice, that he sought the truth, that it meant something to him. It was important. Now, you didn't have to talk to John more than about an hour to find out that he truly did love mercy. And he was active about that. He would look actively for opportunities to be merciful, consistent always with justice, but to grant mercy when he could, to encourage others to look for opportunity in their life to extend mercy, in and out of the courtroom, to consider the great and the small always. I had the opportunity to be his next door neighbor at the office, and it was so much fun. But I really recognized his humility. He wouldn't say much in meetings or discussions when there were a lot of people around, but he would stick his head in later and say, I've been thinking, and would come up with an exquisite solution to the problem on the table. He was so quiet, as you all know, but so full of energy, and I never saw him more animated than when he served on the building committee for the new courthouse. And he would come back and have the plans for whatever, and show me that whatever the new project was going to be, part of the project. And one day he looked at me and said, "This will endure." And I could tell from his remarks that he meant it was something he would leave that would endure. But I'm here to tell you today what you all already know, and that is that his legacy of justice, of mercy and humility endures and will endure forever. Now, you know that the 21st Circuit commissioned a tree to be planted. That certainly will endure. And Will was kind enough to assist me today with a hand-blown glass bowl for you and for John in gratitude for our friend and our colleague and for his example to us all. It is an enduring legacy.
Now, I hate to do this because we've had such stirring moments about John's career, about his service, but he did touch people and touched people in different ways. He had a roommate who was also a lawyer, but it wasn't his calling. And John encouraged him to follow his passion. And so we're going to end this formal part of the program. Hope everybody stays for informal cocktails, food, and discussion. But I want to ask John Lewis to come up and to share with us the alternative career that John Essner encouraged him to do as we come out of COVID and resume our lives. John?
Thank you. I want to thank Cindy and Will and Lisa for letting me be part of the celebration of life of my best friend. What Mike was referring to was about 5 years ago, I decided to start in stand-up comedy. And John encouraged me a lot, and I was glad he did because I've had a lot of fun with that. I've been asked to share some humorous recollections of our quirky guy, so here goes. I first saw John at the law school orientation, and I knew he was different. Here was this guy standing off to the side with long blonde hair, wearing a Hawaiian shirt, smoking a cigarette. I was on the other side of the room. I had long blonde hair, had an orange sweatshirt, and I was smoking a cigarette. So right away I knew I'd found a kindred spirit. We started talking, and I found out we both came from large out-of-state universities, UCLA and me from the University of Wisconsin. We both survived the turbulence times on the campuses. This was during the early 70s. We were strangers in a strange land. We agreed to that, but we agreed that we'd help each other get through it, and we did. Our first year, we ended up sharing a 4-bedroom apartment with 2 other guys who also became lifelong friends for the grand total of $90 a month. Each of us had to pay $22.50, which was an exorbitant amount. Even that was too much for John. He jumped at the chance when the assistant dean of the law school made him an offer he couldn't refuse. The dean told him that he could live in the clock tower at the end of the dean's favorite street for free, and all he had to do was keep the street free of leaves. Talk about a quirky place to live. I remembered it as circular, but I drove by it today. It's actually oblong, but it was 3 levels. We had a spiral staircase running up through the middle of it. Bottom floor was the bathroom. Second floor was the kitchen, which meant there was an outlet. He could plug a hot plate in. Third floor was the bedroom. John was not a big fan of creature comforts, so this served his needs fine. He was also known around campus for his brown big Volkswagen Bug, which got us to a lot of interesting places. Came in especially handy during our 3rd year for trips to Illinois during the Budweiser beer strike.
when I graduated, I left St. Louis and moved to Kansas City. We made frequent visits back and forth. John would always tell me I was welcome at the Essner Arms. He and Cindy were wonderful hosts. I always gave them a 5-star rating. On the phone, we'd talk a lot on the phone, and he'd regale me with tales of his Pink Flamingo softball team. They were known for the 2 pink flamingos they would put in the ground before every game, and for the colorful pink flamingo t-shirts, which they wore and changed every season. His 3rd year of law school, he was made chairman of the Barrister's Ball, which was the law school's annual social event. He was so excited, he went out and bought this bright lime green suit. Remember, this was the 70s. And some people would say that you could even see it in the dark. It later became part of several Halloween costumes. On one of my last visits to St. Louis, I was coming down the stairs with my luggage, and I put a plastic bag on the table. It had my underwear and some other things in it. Don't ask me why. And John was there, and he was getting ready to go to work. So he picked up that bag thinking it was his lunch. I quickly realized what happened. So I called him at the court. He said, "No problem. I'll have my bailiff down at the curb holding the bag for you." So sure enough, as I turned the corner, here's this very confused man holding a plastic bag. So I swooped in and picked it up, and I was on my merry way. Just another example, if you've heard this afternoon, of how far John would go for his family and friends. He was a wonderful guy, and he was a wonderful friend. I'm going to miss him very much. Thank you.
And I think all of you have more stories to share with the family and other friends, and I again encourage you to stick around, have a cocktail, have some food, but we're also going to have some more music while people get up and move around. And Cindy, is the rain stopped? Do we know? Are people able to go outside again? Or? We don't know. So, but feel free to get up, and Mark and Nancy will continue to play some beautiful songs for us.
Mackenzie's playing songs.